In 1987, Nicholas Walterstorff, I have to read that very carefully, the American theologian, he lost his 25-year-old son in a freak and tragic climbing accident. And as he began to process his grief, he began to write a series of short reflections and essays, and he later released it as a book called Lament for a Son. And as he was just processing the unique tragedy of his own story, he just found his field of vision lifting, expanding to the injustice and oppression and grief that mark the human condition. He wrote these words as he was weeping for his son. He wrote, "I shall look at the world through tears. Perhaps I shall see things that dry-eyed I could not see." And through tears, here's what he began to see. Here's his first conclusion. He said, "The wounds of all humanity are an unanswered question." An unanswered question. I feel that those are words that could have been lifted straight from Solomon's reflections in Ecclesiastes. Solomon's looping, recurring, confusing, grieved thoughts on life under the sun. Judith just read for us this: "The righteous get what the wicked deserve, and the wicked get what the righteous deserve. This, too, I say, is meaningless." Or in other words, the wounds of all humanity are an unanswered question. Every story of abuse asks a question: where is God? Every miscarriage of justice: will righteousness ever be done? Every geopolitical crisis: is all of this going somewhere? This morning we're in the second to last sermon in our series in Ecclesiastes, and we're turning to the theme of injustice, suffering, oppression. Solomon leaves us in some ways with an unanswered question. He leaves us with this call to look out at the world, to lament, to linger on this question. Like Walterstorff, to look through tears at the world and trust that in God's mercy we'll see hope. We'll see something that dry-eyed we could not see. And so through tears, through a genuine grieving place of injustice in the world, here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to look around at injustice. Then we're going to look up to the God who brings justice and judgment. And third, we're going to look inward to our own response. We're going to look around, we're going to look up, we're going to look inward. Solomon begins by looking around. Look again at verse 9 of chapter 8. This heart-wrenching observation. "All this I saw, looking around, as I applied my mind to everything done under the sun. There is a time when a man lords it over others to his own hurt." Earlier in the book, chapter 4, verses 1 and 2, he says this: "Again I looked, and I saw all the oppression that was taking place under the sun. I saw the tears of the oppressed, and they have no comforter. Power was on the side of their oppressors, and they have no comforter." Solomon does what many of us are scared to do. He takes a moment to look. He lifts his eyes, and what he sees is a plain and unignorable reality. This morning we might just use the singular word, injustice, to describe it. People hurting people. Some people downtrodden and vulnerable and abused, and other people greedy, living in luxury, hoarding wealth. Solomon sees people lording it over one another. He sees tears flowing. He sees power corrupting. And you and I, as we live our Christian life, sometimes want to dash to hope. We want not to look, but to put our eyes down here and run. But we find in the biblical narrative, you can't read Scripture without being struck by the biblical willingness to pause and observe and lament. The biblical willingness to acknowledge the crushing weight of what goes on around us every single day. At Grace Community this week, we are a couple weeks behind in the prayer course, and we were looking this week at intercession together, and I said to a few people in the room who work with vulnerable people, I said, would you just share a couple of things you're seeing in the city that we can intercede for? And one thing after another was shared. Until people would say, I'm so sorry, I forgot one more thing. Oh, there's one more thing. Oh, there's another thing. I'm so sorry, we can't pray without me mentioning this thing. And the list grew longer and longer and longer. Addiction, criminal exploitation of children, poverty, abuse, gang violence within walking distance of where we're sitting now. But beyond this area, you only need to open the news when you get home to find reports of famine, government corruption, wealth inequality, war crime. What happens when we look is that we see injustice everywhere, and Ecclesiastes gives us permission to look. To not be like the hurried parent ushering their child through Central Station and covering their eyes. Not to see the homeless man begging at the side of the road, but to stop and look, to take a moment to be confronted again. Well, there's a great temptation for us. If you have found hope and peace in Jesus, to just think, I'm doing fine. I'll trust God with what's out there. I'm going to focus on what's in here. But the Bible never gives us permission to put our head in the sand. There's a kind of false godliness welling up in us sometimes where we just stick our heads in the sand, pretend that Jesus has already sorted the issue, and just get on with our lives. Some of us, we just can't face the weight of the world. We open BBC News and we think, I cannot bear another day of reading these stories. And we numb ourselves with digital distraction. We live our lives just filling ourselves with cheap entertainment. Neither of those options will do. In this world, we do, if we'll look, see power corrupting. We do see children mistreated. We do see darkness. We don't understand why, we do see the evil pays off. We see the wicked prosper. We see the innocent suffer. We see greed and oppression right at the top of the pile of this world. And that means that a Christian faith which glibly and kind of passively rushes over these realities is not sharing and living in true hope, but is actually dismissing the weight of what Solomon wants us to see over and over. Vapor, meaningless, mist. The Anglican priest Fleming Rutledge puts it this way. She says, "It is not tolerable to speak of hope unless we are willing to look squarely at the overwhelming presence of evil in our world." We look squarely. That's what Christians do. We're not glib and dismissive. It also means we can't be polarized politically. We can't choose what things to look at. It means we don't pick and choose. And so I just want to give you two realities of the overwhelming presence of evil in our moment. And some of you are going to hear one and you're going to roll your eyes. And some of you will hear the other and you will send me a very unhappy email this week. My inbox has been having issues recently. And so Johnny's volunteered. If there's a problem, he'll receive it, he'll grab a coffee with you. He's actually blocked out his week from work. Someone in my Grace community shared this with me this week. This is the first thing. She works with families in our city that include a number of ethnic minorities who have this week, in response to tension and protests, become so deeply afraid to leave their homes that they have bolted the door and refused to leave. One block of flats, she told me, has a tradition, because it's so multicultural, of every family putting their nation's flag on their door. And because ethnic tension became so heightened in parts of our city this week, for complex political reasons that we don't have time to go into, those families said, I've got to take my flag down. If I'm known to be from this place or that place, it's not going to go well for me and my family. They know from experience the kind of abuse and verbal violence and harassment that their children will face if they're identified as an ethnic minority. 3 people injured in racist violence in our city this week. Those are hidden and visible stories of everyday injustice. We've got to look unflinchingly at that, and we've got to look unflinchingly at this. In 2025, 18,783 children were killed in the womb in Scotland. That's 55% higher than a decade ago. We are in a cultural moment that increasingly disregards the most vulnerable. We kill our youngest in the name of bodily autonomy and freedom. In fact, if we want to look squarely at injustice and not flinch, here's something I discovered this week by just comparing some numbers. Statistically, if you were to meet a random Glaswegian woman of childbearing age, it would be more likely that she had had an abortion in 2025 than that she was a follower of Jesus. The abortion rate in Glasgow is higher than the rate of Bible-believing Christians. More than a quarter of the next generation are being killed in the womb. Countless women in this city sit guilty and grieving, having been led astray by a cultural lie to a heartbreaking, dreadful conclusion. They sit without the hope of the gospel for the forgiveness of their sins, and they sit without the hope for the future of their child because they have not been told the good news about Jesus. We're tempted not to look at that. We're tempted not to say it out loud. Solomon says, look at the world we live in. We look squarely at both, and we allow our hearts to feel deeply at both. The NIV softens the language of verse 1 of chapter 4. It doesn't just say Solomon sees and observes. The Hebrew is something closer to, I looked and oh, all the oppression. There's a guttural cry that comes out of Solomon as he just begins to look. That means that what I've just said is not me being on a soapbox and telling you my political opinions. Our looking is a compassionate, guttural overflow. Jeremiah wept in grief. Jesus drew near to Jerusalem and began to weep. To be a Christian, if we'll allow the work of the Spirit, is sometimes to weep. One writer says this, redemption itself requires that we let every tear roll. And we look with tears because God himself is not a dispassionate robot in the sky. As his eyes survey the world and see things that we can't imagine, he responds with great compassion and love. Psalm 103, as a father has compassion on his children, so the Lord has compassion on those who fear him. In the sight of our weakness, in the sight of injustice, the deepest overflowing response of God's heart is compassion, mercy. Listen to how closely God identifies with the needy. Proverbs 14:31. He says this, whoever oppresses the poor shows contempt for their maker, but whoever is kind to the needy honors God. God himself says, I'm with him. I'm with her. The one hidden away, scared to leave their home. The most vulnerable, the discarded, the ignored. God says, I'm with her. That's the depth with which God identifies himself with the needs of the vulnerable. God is not a distant and indifferent God, but a God who has intimate compassion and concern. He cares for the powerless. He defends those who have no one in their corner. In the words of Isaiah, his heart recoils within him in love. I'm struck by these words, 2 Chronicles 16:9. The eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth. And so it hurts, doesn't it, to imagine what he sees. Every hidden sin, every bribe taken under the table, every unspeakable evil hidden from respectable eyes. God sees, and God, Solomon finds himself realizing in a moment of hope, will do something about it. In Psalm 73, the psalmist does all we've just done. He recounts the evil of the world. Why do the wicked prosper? Why do the innocent get oppressed? And then Psalm 73:16, he throws up his hands. Here's what he says, when I thought how to understand this, it seemed to be a wearisome task. Remember how we began. The wounds of all humanity are an unanswered question. That is for the psalmist until, he goes on, it seemed to me a wearisome task until I went in to the sanctuary of God. Then I discerned their end. He went into the sanctuary of God. Friends, we've looked around. We've got to look up. Let's read Ecclesiastes 8 again, 12 to 13. It says this, although a wicked person who commits 100 crimes may live a long time, I know that it will go better with those who fear God, who are reverent before him. Yet because the wicked do not fear God, it will not go well with them, and their days will not. Why does Solomon have this kind of clarity that it will go better for those who fear God, and it will not go well for those who do evil? Because if you're to look around the world, you would have no sense that that's the reality. Well, the answer is found in one simple word, and the word is judgment. You and I tend to feel that judgment is a negative word, something we shouldn't hope for, shouldn't wait for, shouldn't delight in. We're tempted to think of God's judgment as the kind of shadow side of his character, the bit that as Christians we don't need to think about. But for the biblical writers, it is the beating heart of their future hope. Look at Ecclesiastes 3:17, for example. Right off the back of Solomon lamenting about injustice, he continues this way. I said to myself, God will bring into judgment both the righteous and the wicked. We spoke this truth together earlier in the Creed. He will return to judge the living and the dead. The reality of judgment, would you believe it, is a comforting reality. It's the reality, in the words of Martin Luther King Jr., that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. See, the length of that arc is the reason that life in this world feels futile. It feels like nothing's changing. It feels like the wicked prosper. It feels like nothing good happens to the innocent. We struggle to see the horizon. We don't see justice done in this world. That means that the fundamental posture of biblical response to injustice is to wait. Not despair, waiting. The biblical response to injustice is glad-hearted trust in the God who will return, flick the lights on, and expose the hidden injustice of this world. Judgment should reassure us. It should comfort us. We culturally prefer mercy. We love stories of oppressors who have found forgiveness because we love mercy. We need to rediscover the reality that the gospel is good news for victims, not only repentant perpetrators. The enemies of God's people, those who persecute the church, those who abuse the helpless, will face the full fury of God's righteous anger. You've read Jesus say, anyone who causes one of these little children to stumble, it would be better for them to be thrown into the sea with a millstone tied around their neck. Injustice pays in this world, but one day we will find that evil does not pay in the economy of God's kingdom. A world is coming with Christ. A world free of injustice. A world ruled by a king who never takes bribes, who can't be coerced. Ruled by a king who doesn't mistreat his people, who doesn't sit on a lofty throne ignoring the needs of his nation. In his kingdom, there'll be no discarding of the vulnerable. There'll be no division. There'll be no war. There'll be no cheating or abuse or trafficking. There'll be no any of it. Jesus, on the day he returns, will make light work of the darkness of this world. There will be no struggle. He will say a word, and he will throw the darkness of this world into hell with Satan and his demons. What feels today like a great struggle, the struggle for justice, will be dealt with in an instance on the day of the Lord. Walter Storff at the beginning, we said he lamented that the wounds of humanity were an unanswered question. He, like the psalmist in Psalm 73, went into the presence of God and found himself surprised by hope. Here's where he landed. Grieving with the injustice of this world. Here's where he said, am I deluded in believing that in God the question shouted out by the winds of the world has its answer? Is it delusional for us to believe that there's an answer to injustice? No, I don't think so. Here's why. In our God, we see a God who has not only observed human injustice, he has shared in it. He has gladly and willingly taken it on. God himself was the victim of a miscarriage of justice. Unjustly crucified at the hands of power-hungry politicians and religious elites. God was subjected to a sham trial. The just judge was unjustly judged to be a common criminal and was nailed to a cross he didn't deserve. And on that cross, I need you to painfully engage your imagination with me here. On that cross, he took the full fury of God. Just cast your mind back to the God who sees. He sees the lost victims of human trafficking. He sees the misery of those in labor camps. He sees grotesque evil. He sees every single piece of sickening injustice. How do you and I feel about that? Think about the way that God feels about it. A wrath, a loving anger that we can't imagine, and every ounce of it was poured out on the Son of God as he hung, dying a criminal's death. God's answer to the wounds of this world are the wounds of his Son. There's the answer. The gospel offers forgiveness to those who perpetrate injustice. Perhaps that's you. Perhaps you know that you have lived in a way that is deeply unjust, that you've been cruel to the vulnerable, that you've been harsh with your children, that you've turned a blind eye, that you've looked down on people, that you've cheated or manipulated in one way or another. Jesus has taken the judgment that your injustice deserves. There's forgiveness for perpetrators of injustice, and the gospel offers hope for those who are victims of injustice. God is not unfeeling. He's not unfeeling. He's not uncaring in the quiet place of oppression. It feels that our suffering is so immense that nobody could understand. God sees and God understands. The Father heart of God towards the needy is deeper than we can imagine. God offers hope in the gospel for victims of injustice. No dreadful oppression will go unpunished. Friends, this is good news. Nobody gets away with it. Nothing is swept under the rug. If we go to the extreme, Adolf Hitler did not get away with it when he took the easy way out. You cannot take the easy way out. He's come face to face with the God of Psalm 146, who, listen to this, upholds the cause of the oppressed and gives food to the hungry. The Lord sets prisoners free. The Lord gives sight to the blind. The Lord lifts up those who are bowed down. The Lord loves the righteous. The Lord watches over foreigners and sustains the fatherless and the widow, but he frustrates the way of the wicked. I want to encourage you this morning, if that's you, if you are oppressed or hungry, if you are bowed down, if you feel like an exile in a strange land, if you are fatherless, if you are a widow, the tender heart of God is yours to draw near to. He loves you. He upholds your cause. He will defend you the Lord never lets sin go unpunished. It falls on the wicked or it falls on the innocent Savior, Jesus. Either way, we do not live in a world in which justice is ever left undone. That's why in Jesus we have the answer we seek. I love C.S. Lewis's novel, Till We Have Faces. It's this retelling of an ancient Greek myth. And one of the characters, Maya, she lives this life where she's overlooked for her sister and she feels that she's been unjustly treated, and she grumbles and complains at the brokenness of the world, and she wonders aloud in prayer, why has she been fated to live this life? Why do others prosper in a way she hasn't? At the end of her life, as an old woman, she concludes that there is no answer for her. As she sits there, she finds herself having a vision and she encounters God. I love these words. This is the hazy hope of Solomon. This is the hope of the Christian. Here's what she says. She sees the face of the Lord and she says this, I know now, Lord, why you utter no answer. You are yourself the answer. Before your face, questions die away. What other answer could suffice? You are yourself the answer. The unanswered question of injustice is answered in the face of God's Son. Solomon has looked around. He's found a world defined by injustice. Solomon has looked up. He's found somehow the question answered in the reality of God's coming judgment. And now Solomon wants us to look inwards. He wants to counsel us on a life well lived in response to these realities. Look with me at verses 14 and 15. Here's what he says. There is something else meaningless that occurs on earth. The righteous who get what the wicked deserve, and the wicked who get what the righteous deserve. And this too, I say, is meaningless. So, I commend the enjoyment of life, because there is nothing better for a person under the sun than to eat and drink and be glad. Then joy will accompany them in their toil all the days of the life that God has given them under the sun. Isn't that surprising? Do you feel at this point in the sermon, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to enjoy my life. It surprises us as we read. I just want to read between the lines of it and suggest to you three responses for us to the once unanswered and now answered question of injustice. Three ways that we live open-handed lives in an unjust world. Here's the most obvious thing that Solomon says. We should enjoy our lives. It seems like an odd implication. It seems, if we're not careful, that Solomon has decided to be uncaring and calloused and actually tell us to avert our eyes. I don't think that's true. Here's a few reasons why. First, because enjoying the gifts we do have sets the struggles of the world in their proper context. Injustice is only called that because there's such a thing as justice out there somewhere. Which means that suffering itself is a great evil, not just because it is, but in contrast to the glad-hearted joy that God made us for. So to enjoy ourselves, to receive God's gifts gladly, to not feel guilty for what we do have, isn't to downplay suffering, but to set it in its right context. The poet Jack Gilbert writes this. He says, if we deny our happiness, if we resist our satisfaction, then we lessen the importance of their deprivation. We must risk delight. We can do without pleasure, but not delight, not enjoyment. He says we must have the stubbornness to accept our gladness in the ruthless furnace of this world. To make injustice the only measure of our attention is to praise the devil. We cling to the God who will bring justice by enjoying his gifts. Second reason Solomon can command enjoyment is simple, because godly hope can't be overwhelmed. Because of the confidence we have in Jesus, we can scroll through BBC News and continue to praise. We can look the darkness of this world in the face and continue to enjoy the goodness of God because we know where it's going. The world cannot get at the throat of a Christian because her confidence is elsewhere. Our confidence is in the one who will return to set things right. That means that the posture of a Christian, as we said earlier, is to wait, not to war, and to wait by enjoying. That's first. Second, look at Solomon's understanding of who it is that gives us enjoyment. All the days of their life that God has given them under the sun. Solomon's aware that life and its contents are a gift, even as he observes the mistiness of injustice in this world. So here's an observation. The biblical way to think about our lives in this world is as a gift to be shared, not a wage to be stored away. I encourage you this morning, in response to injustice, to live lives of open-handed, joyful generosity. We live in this world with a light touch. If this world is fundamentally unjust and we're waiting for another one, then why would I cling to it? Why would I cling to the things of this world? The way of Jesus is to gladly give away. It's to reach for the bill. It's to help one another in times of need. It's to love those who are grating and difficult. It's to share our possessions and give to the poor. It's to hold everything lightly. The earliest account we have of a Christian church service feels so ordinary. They gathered in homes, they would read scripture, somebody would teach, they would sing, they would pray, they would take communion, and then here's something surprising. They would take an offering. But it wasn't that they would share their details on the screen and encourage people to give financially. They would all bring something physical. They would bring some apples or a spare cloak that was in their cupboard. And they would lay it all at the deacon's feet, and the deacons in the moment would begin to redistribute the goods of the church to those who were needy. That's how fundamental generosity was to the earliest Christians. At the very heart of what it means to follow Jesus is to follow in the footsteps of one who gave everything away. Not to cling on, but to let go, to trust the Lord, to enjoy the things he's given, but not enjoy them so much that we cling tightly. God gave them to me. They're not mine. Take them. That's the way of Jesus. We have a fellowship fund at God's Grace that we hope imitates that kind of early church pattern where all the money in it, if you give to God's Grace and mark your payment, fellowship, they don't want to go somewhere else, then that money will only be used for the needs of the people in this church. It's a kind of redistributing way that we think we can serve and help one another. Why not this week pray? Ask the Lord, Lord, how much do you want me to give to the needs of this community? We enjoy our lives, we give generously. And third, we just note this, that Solomon sets his wise counsel all in the context of the God who governs the universe. Life is not just a gift, it's a gift from this God. That changes the outlook of our lives. It changes the way we think about injustice. It gives us hope. It should, I think, make us a people who pray. It should make us remember that there's a God who tames the wind, who shepherds the mist, a God who can do something about injustice. So I shared with you earlier two realities in our city that desperately need the intervention of God. If our response is to say, oh boy, we've forgotten who we worship, our response must be to begin to pray, plead with the Lord for change. Our posture is not to wage war, but to patiently pray. But this is just an extension of our willingness to look. We're going to shift our center of gravity away from ourselves, to be less concerned with the needs of my week and more concerned with the needs of my neighbor. To spend as much time praying about their lives, their needs, their concerns than I do about my own worries. I wonder whether we just increasingly schedule in specific needs to pray for on specific days. Lord, I'm committing to praying for this issue until I see it budge. Lord, I'm committed to praying that the percentage of Christians will be higher than the abortion rate in Glasgow. And I'm not stopping praying until it happens. God can do that. We pray, that's what I love this. He says this, one saint. Remember that you are one saint. One saint who prays is much more powerful than countless sinners who wage war. Let's be a people who pray. It also means that we walk in integrity. Solomon ends his book with these simple words. The end of the matter, fear God and keep his commandments. We're going to wrap up on that next week, but for now, just know this. We must respond to a broken world. Yes, by praying. Yes, by enjoying. We must respond to a broken world with radical wholeness. We're going to invite the Lord to put us together again. We're going to respond with obedience, integrity. As Christians, we can trust the righteousness of God and resist the worldly way of cutting corners, undercutting others to get what we want. The Christian life is simple. It's this. At work on a Monday morning, a Christian refuses to do things poorly to quickly get through her to-do list. That's what it means to follow in the way of Jesus. To follow in the way of Jesus, the just judge, means that a Christian refuses to speak poorly of someone else going for promotion to try and get ahead of them. To be a follower of Jesus means, as a student, that you willingly accept a longer day in the library when everyone has left because you refuse to outsource your work to ChatGPT. That's what it means. We have integrity. We don't cut corners. We live justly in the world. The thrust of Ecclesiastes is that this world might be chaos, but we live underneath the sovereign hand of a God who's not. We can trust him. Called to walk in integrity, to follow the one who stands over and above this broken world. Tim Keller puts it this way. Let me finish with this. He says, if a person has grasped the meaning of God's grace in his heart, he will do justice. Grace should make you just.